My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 46 years old, and the moment I realized my father had erased me from his life didn't happen at his funeral. It happened a week later, in a quiet Park Avenue law office, while I was sitting 3 chairs away from my sister, the golden child, watching her smile like she'd already won. The attorney said my father wanted to leave everything to Olivia. The house, the money, the legacy. I didn't react. I didn't have to. Because right after that, he opened a second folder. And that's when my sister's smile disappeared. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been the one who stayed, who did the work, who carried the family weight, only to realize you were never the favorite. I read the comments, and you'd be surprised how many inheritance stories start quietly and end with betrayal. If this already feels familiar, stay with me. I grew up in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Westchester County, the kind of place where every driveway had a basketball hoop and every mailbox had the same family name on it for decades. From the outside, we looked like a textbook American success story. My father, Richard Harper, had built his engineering firm from nothing. No investors, no safety net, just grit, late nights, and an unshakable belief that hard work always paid off. That belief shaped my childhood. Some of my earliest memories are of sitting on the stairs after dinner, waiting for my dad to come home. I could hear his truck before I saw it, the familiar rumble pulling into the driveway long after the sun had gone down. When he walked through the door, his boots were dusty, his shoulders heavy, and his mind still somewhere on a job site. He'd ruffle my hair, ask about school, and promise we'd do something fun this weekend. Most weekends we didn't. My sister Olivia didn't wait on the stairs. She was younger by 8 years, born after the company had finally stabilized, after the mortgage stopped being a monthly crisis. By the time she was old enough to remember anything, Dad wasn't exhausted. He was proud, successful. People shook his hand at the grocery store. Clients called our house line to thank him for projects finished ahead of schedule. Olivia grew up surrounded by applause I never heard. Thanksgiving dinners were where the difference showed most clearly. The kitchen would smell like turkey and butter, football murmuring from the living room, relatives packed around the table. Olivia would talk about a school art project or a class trip, and Dad's face would light up like she'd just pitched him the next big contract. When I talked about helping him file permits or organize invoices after school, he'd smile politely. "That's good, Daniel," he'd say. "Someone's got to handle the boring stuff." Everyone would laugh, including me. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was being useful, that this was what being dependable looked like. But even as a kid, I noticed the pattern. On Christmas mornings, Olivia unwrapped things that came with excitement: a camera, concert tickets, a sketch set imported from Europe. I got practical gifts: a new backpack, work boots when I was 16, a calculator for college. Dad called it preparing me for the real world. Olivia was allowed to dream. I was trained to carry weight. When I graduated high school, Dad showed up late. He'd been stuck at a job site where a subcontractor had messed up the rebar placement. He hugged me, apologized, and handed me the keys to his old pickup. "You'll need it," he said. "You're going to be helping me a lot this summer." 2 years later, he cancelled a site visit to fly to Manhattan for Olivia's first gallery showcase. I watched the photos afterward, Dad standing beside her, arm around her shoulders, beaming like she'd just saved the company. I laughed it off at the time, told friends my dad was just proud of her creativity. But something settled in my chest that night, quiet and heavy. By the time I finished college, I was already working at the firm full-time. Not in a symbolic role, in operations, contracts, compliance, payroll. I learned how to read soil reports, negotiate with municipalities, manage crews twice my age. I became the person everyone went to when something went wrong. Olivia moved to Manhattan. She took part-time jobs at boutiques, tried PR for a while, then drifted into what she called lifestyle consulting. Dad paid her rent without ever saying the word loan. Every month, like clockwork, money moved quietly from his account to hers. I never asked how much. I didn't want to know. I stayed close to the office, close to Dad, close to the responsibility he trusted me with, but never celebrated. In 2017, everything shifted. We were sitting in his office late one evening, the kind of quiet where the hum of the HVAC system feels louder than your own thoughts. Spreadsheets were open on his desk. I was walking him through quarterly numbers when he leaned back and said something casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "I've been thinking about succession." I felt my shoulders tighten, just a little. "Olivia has a creative mind," he continued. "She sees things differently. I think she could take the company in new directions someday." I waited for him to say my name. He didn't. I kept my voice steady. "She's never worked here, Dad." He waved it off. "That can be learned. Vision can't." That was the moment I understood something I'd been avoiding my entire life. I wasn't being groomed to lead. I was being relied on to hold everything together until someone else decided what to do with it. That night, I went home and sat alone in my office, staring at spreadsheets that represented 2 decades of my life. 42 employees, millions in active contracts, families who trusted our company to keep the lights on, and a sister who had never once carried any of that weight. I didn't feel angry. I felt afraid, because for the first time, I could clearly see the future, and it was one decision away from collapse. After that night in 2017, I stopped thinking of the company as just a business. It became something closer to a living thing, fragile, exposed, dependent on decisions that could either protect it or quietly poison it. I didn't tell anyone how deeply that conversation with my father had shaken me. On the surface, nothing changed. I still showed up before sunrise. I still stayed up late. I still fixed problems before they reached his desk. But internally, something had shifted. I started noticing details I'd ignored before. The way Dad talked about Olivia when she wasn't in the room. Not in specifics, not in facts, but in feelings. "She's got a good heart. She understands people. She reminds me of myself when I was young." It didn't matter that he'd never seen her balance a budget or manage a deadline. In his mind, those things were secondary. Emotional certainty mattered more than evidence. Around the same time, Dad began misremembering the past. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things. He'd credit Olivia for ideas that had come from project managers. He'd talk about meetings she'd never attended, decisions she'd never made. Once, he thanked her for pushing us to bid on the Morrison project, a contract she'd been halfway across Europe during. I corrected him once. He looked at me like I'd interrupted a pleasant dream. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. I nodded. He frowned, then smiled as if smoothing over an awkward moment. After that, I stopped correcting him. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Because every misremembered detail quietly rewrote the story of who had built what, and who deserved what in the end. The real turning point came through a conversation that had nothing to do with inheritance. I was meeting with Marcus Lee, our corporate attorney, about liability exposure on a new infrastructure contract. He talked through worst-case scenarios the way lawyers do, calm, methodical, detached. Then he mentioned something that stuck with me. "For family firms like yours," he said, "a holding company structure can be a smart layer of protection. It shields operating assets, limits risk, makes succession cleaner." Succession. The word landed differently now. I asked questions, lots of them, about ownership distribution, about control versus optics, about how much authority actually comes from what's written on paper, not what people assume. Marcus answered without suspicion. To him, this was just business. To me, it was a way to protect 42 families from a decision driven by guilt and favoritism. When I presented the idea to Dad, I didn't frame it as protection from Olivia. I framed it as protection from lawsuits, taxes, and unpredictable markets. I showed him articles, case studies, numbers. I spoke his language. "This keeps the company safe," I said, "no matter what happens." He studied the documents for a long time. Then he signed. Watching his pen move across the page was one of the strangest moments of my life. I felt relieved, and something close to betrayal. But I told myself the truth. If I didn't do this, someone else would eventually undo everything we'd built. The holding company was filed in Delaware in 2018. Quiet, clean, efficient. Dad kept a visible stake. I held control. The rest went into a trust no one paid attention to. Olivia didn't ask a single question. When Dad mentioned the restructuring at Sunday dinner, she nodded absently, scrolling through her phone. "That's great, Daddy," she said. "Daniel's good at all that boring legal stuff." I smiled and passed the salad. The next few years were the most successful in the company's history. Bigger contracts, better margins, less chaos. Dad slowly stepped back, spending more time at his place in the Hamptons, golfing with friends who admired the version of his life that made for good stories. Olivia floated. She tried interior design, PR, lifestyle branding. None of it stuck. Dad covered her expenses without question. I didn't interfere. It wasn't my place. Or so I told myself. In late 2022, Dad's health began to slip. Nothing alarming, just enough to make me uneasy. He repeated stories, forgot details. His memories became softer, less anchored to reality. And always, Olivia's role grew larger in those stories. One evening, I overheard him on the phone, voice low, tense. He didn't see me in the hallway. "I owe her," he said. "I didn't always do right by her." I never learned who he was talking to, or what debt he believed he was repaying, but I understood the danger immediately. Guilt is more powerful than reason. When he told me months later that he'd updated his will, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. He said it gently, like he was doing me a favor by being honest. "I want to make sure Olivia's taken care of," he said. I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't fight, because by then I understood something my father never had. Love can be emotional, but inheritance is paperwork, and paperwork remembers things people forget. When Dad died in February 2023, the grief was real. I loved him. But beneath the grief was a cold clarity, the kind that only comes when you've seen the ending coming for years. At the funeral, Olivia cried beautifully. People gathered around her, murmuring about how strong she was, how much Dad believed in her. I stood a few steps back, shaking hands with employees, promising stability. Because while everyone else was mourning the man my father had been, I was preparing for the moment his choices would finally collide with reality. The week after the funeral felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life with my name stitched onto it. The house in Westchester was suddenly too quiet. No late-night phone calls from Dad asking about a bid detail. No early morning texts reminding me to watch the margins. Just silence, thick enough to press against my ears. That silence didn't last. 3 days after the service, I got a call from our bank. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. That's what made it dangerous. "Daniel," the account manager said, using the careful tone people reserve for conversations that can't be taken back. "We need to talk about leadership continuity." I knew exactly what that meant. He explained that a few municipal clients had already called, asking who would be signing off on guarantees going forward. One of them had mentioned hearing that Olivia Harper was stepping into her father's role. The bank needed reassurance, clear authority, no ambiguity. I thanked him, promised clarity soon, and hung up. Then I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling something between anger and exhaustion. Olivia hadn't waited for the reading. She'd already started telling her version of the future. That afternoon, I went into the office early, earlier than usual. The building smelled like cleaning solution and old carpet, the lights still half dim. I walked past desks where people had spent years trusting my decisions, my judgment, my steadiness. None of them knew what was coming. By mid-morning, the rumors had reached them anyway. I could feel it in the way conversations stopped when I walked by, in the cautious looks, in the questions no one asked out loud. Stability matters in this business. Confidence matters. Uncertainty spreads like mold. At noon, Elena Cruz knocked on my door. She didn't waste time. "I'm hearing things," she said. "From clients, from a board member. Is Olivia really taking over?" I looked at her, calm, competent, someone who'd earned every inch of authority she carried, and chose my words carefully. "No," I said. Nothing changes until it's official. She studied my face. Good, she said simply. Because if it does, we're going to have a problem. That was the first time someone said it out loud. The board meeting was scheduled for later that week. An informal gathering, technically. A check-in. In reality, it was a test. Olivia showed up. She arrived 20 minutes late, dressed like she was headed to a magazine shoot instead of a conference room. Navy suit, sharp lines, heels that clicked loudly on the floor. She smiled like the room belonged to her. Sorry, she said breezily. Traffic. She sat beside me without asking. The questions started small. What's our exposure to the Hartford expansion? How are we managing cost overruns on the bridge renovation? What's the timeline on the environmental review? Olivia answered first. She spoke in broad strokes, vision language, growth narratives, synergy, modernization. She didn't say anything technically wrong, just nothing technically useful. When a board member asked about permitting delays tied to wetland impact assessments, she paused too long. Look at me, I answered, every time. By the end of the meeting, the room had shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. People leaned toward me when they spoke, addressed questions to me. Olivia noticed. Her smile tightened. In the hallway afterward, she cornered me. You didn't have to undermine me in there, she said quietly. I kept my voice even. I answered the questions. You could have let me handle it. I met her eyes. You didn't know the answers. Her expression hardened. That night, I got the text. You think you're so indispensable. Dad always knew I was the future. I didn't reply. 2 days later, I found out she'd been back at the house. Not to grieve, to sort. Boxes appeared in the living room. Old furniture moved. Family photos taken down. When I asked what she was doing, she didn't look up from her phone. Getting things ready, she said. It's my place now. My chest tightened. Nothing's been decided, I said. She laughed, not kindly. Please, the will's clear. Everyone knows that. That was when I realized she wasn't waiting for the legal process. She was already rewriting reality. The email hit my inbox the following morning, from a law firm I didn't recognize. Regarding the estate of Richard Harper, I read it twice. They were requesting documentation related to company ownership, operating authority, and governance structure. On Olivia's behalf, she was preparing to challenge me before the will had even been read. I felt something settle in my stomach, cold, heavy, focused. That evening, I drove past the old house instead of going inside. I sat in my car, engine off, watching the porch light flicker on as Olivia moved through rooms that had never truly been hers to manage. For the first time since Dad died, I wasn't grieving, I was bracing, because the family conflict had crossed a line. It wasn't emotional anymore, it was strategic, and I knew with absolute clarity that whatever happened in the attorney's office at the reading of the will, only one of us was actually prepared for it. The days leading up to the will reading were some of the longest of my life. Every conversation felt loaded. Every silence felt intentional. Olivia stopped pretending we were on the same side. She didn't yell or threaten. She did something worse. She spoke as if the outcome was already decided. At brunch with extended family, she talked about modernizing the firm. On phone calls I overheard, she mentioned bringing in outside consultants and cleaning house. Cleaning house. I watched employees who had been with us for over a decade smile politely while she spoke, their eyes flicking toward me, confused and uneasy. No one challenged her directly. People rarely do when someone speaks with inherited confidence. That confidence started to infect the family. My aunt pulled me aside one afternoon in the kitchen, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. You know your father always wanted Olivia to have everything, she said. She just has that spark. I nodded, because arguing felt pointless. A cousin texted me later that night. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll be fine. I stared at that message for a long time. You'll be fine. It was the phrase people use when they've already decided who deserves more. 2 nights before the reading, Olivia showed up at my house unannounced. She didn't come in. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, the fall air sharp between us. "I want to be clear," she said. "I'm not cutting you out. I just don't think you belong at the top." I laughed once, short, bitter. "You're serious?" "Of course I am," she replied. "You're good at operations. That's your lane. Dad knew that. He told me." There it was. Not anger, not grief, ownership. "You really think you deserve the same as me?" she added. "For what? You did your job. I was his daughter." The words hit harder than I expected. For a second, I saw us as kids again, me holding a flashlight while Dad fixed the car, Olivia asleep inside, warm and untouched by grease or cold. The roles had never changed. They'd just been renamed. I stepped closer to the door. "This conversation is over," I said. She shrugged. "Suit yourself. Friday will settle it." After she left, I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, staring at the dark street. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. I felt clear. The next morning, Howard Klein called. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "your father was very specific in his final instructions." "I understand," I said. There was a pause, papers shifting. "There may be misunderstandings," he added, "about what certain documents mean." I thanked him and hung up. That was the moment I knew. Olivia thought the will was the weapon. She had no idea it was just the bait. Friday arrived grey and cold, the kind of weather that drains colour from everything. I parked a block away from the law office and walked the rest, my shoes echoing against the sidewalk. Central Park looked distant and muted through the trees. Inside, the office smelled like leather and old books. The air conditioning hummed softly. A box of tissues sat untouched on the table. Olivia arrived early, dressed impeccably, portfolio in hand. She greeted me with an air kiss that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope this doesn't get ugly," she said. I met her smile with nothing. Howard Klein entered, carrying 2 folders. 2. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and began with formalities. He spoke about Dad's life, his accomplishments, his intentions. Olivia leaned forward, pen ready. Then he read the will. Everything to Olivia. The room seemed to exhale with her. She glanced at me, triumphant. Then Howard cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he said, "there's a matter of clarification regarding the estate." He opened the second folder, and as he began to explain corporate ownership, share distribution, and legal control, I watched something I'd never seen before happen to my sister. Her certainty cracked. Not all at once, slowly, line by line, sentence by sentence. Confusion replaced confidence, fear replaced entitlement. She looked at me like I was the last solid thing in a room that had started to tilt. "Tell him," she whispered. "There's a mistake." I fold my hands. "There isn't." By the time Howard finished, the truth was unavoidable. The will gave her everything my father thought he owned, but the thing she wanted most? He hadn't owned it in years. The silence that followed was heavier than grief, and in that silence I understood something final. Favoritism can shape a family, but only preparation decides who survives it. The room went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like even the air had decided to stop moving. Howard Klein finished his sentence and folded his hands on top of the second folder. The leather chair beneath me felt suddenly stiff, unfamiliar. Across the table, Olivia stared at him as if he'd switched languages halfway through a conversation. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "My father owned the company. He started it." Howard nodded, patient and practiced. "He started it, yes, but ownership changed." He slid a document across the table, turning it so she could read the highlighted lines herself. Corporate filings, dates, percentages, Delaware letterhead. Richard Harper retained a 20% stake in the holding company at the time of his death, Howard continued. The controlling interest, 70%, has been held by Daniel since April of 2018. I didn't look at Olivia. I watched her hands instead. They were shaking. "That can't be right," she said. "There has to be a mistake. He wouldn't—" She turned to me then, eyes wide, searching, for confirmation, for rescue. "Daniel," she said, "tell him." I met her gaze. "There's no mistake." The words landed between us, heavy and final. "But the will says everything goes to me," she snapped, her voice rising, cracking through the calm she'd worn all morning. "Everything. That includes the company." Howard leaned forward slightly. "The will governs what your father owned personally at the time of his death. His home, his accounts, his shares. It does not grant control over assets he no longer possesses." "How much is that?" Olivia asked, her voice suddenly small. Howard glanced at his notes. "Approximately $2.1 million in personal assets, including the house." She blinked. 2.1? I spoke then, quietly. "The firm was last valued at just over 16 million. Her head snapped up. "So I get... Your inherited 20% stake would be worth around 3.2 million if sold," I said. "Assuming there's a buyer, and assuming the board approves." The Mont Blanc pen slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a sharp clatter. "This is insane," she said, standing abruptly. "You manipulated him. You tricked him into signing those papers." Howard opened his mouth, but I spoke first. "I protected the company," I said. "From exactly this." She turned on me, anger finally breaking through the shock. "You did this behind my back." "I did it in plain sight," I replied. "You just never bothered to look." Her face flushed. "He promised me. He told me I'd run it, that it was my inheritance." Howard cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Harper believed that to be true. Unfortunately, belief and legal reality don't always align." Olivia laughed then, a brittle, broken sound. "So what now? I just don't count?" "You inherit a significant estate," Howard said. And nothing that matters," she cut in. She looked at me again, and for the first time, there was no confidence left, no performance, just fear. "You planned this," she said, "for years." "Yes," I said, "since the day Dad told me you had vision." Her mouth opened, then closed. "You think I would have destroyed it," she whispered. "I know you would have," I said, not unkindly. "Not because you're evil, because you've never had to carry consequences." The room felt smaller, warmer, like the walls were listening. Howard gathered his papers. "If there's nothing further, I'll have my assistant prepare the transfer documents for the personal estate." He stood, nodded to both of us, and left. The door closed softly behind him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, Central Park moved on. Joggers passed, dogs tugged at leashes. Life continued, indifferent to what had just shattered in that room. Finally, Olivia sank back into her chair. "I thought this was the end," she said. "I didn't realize it was the part where I found out who I really am." I stood, straightening my jacket. "It's the part where we both do," I said. And as I walked toward the door, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something colder, resolved. We didn't speak again for several minutes after Howard left. Olivia stared out the window like she was watching someone else's life keep moving without her. I watched her shoulders rise and fall, slow and uneven, the way they do when a person finally understands there's no appeal left to make. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, not looking at me. "Since 2017, I said, "when Dad told me you had vision." She nodded once, like she'd expected that answer. The anger didn't come back. What replaced it was something quieter, something closer to panic. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You get everything and I disappear." "You get what the will gives you," I said, "and a choice." She turned to me then, eyes red but steady. "What kind of choice?" "The company's expanding its project management division," I said. "Entry level, real hours, real accountability, no titles you didn't earn." She almost laughed. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious." She looked down at her hands. "And if I fail?" "Then you walk away with your inheritance," I said, "and I stop protecting you." That was the truth, and she knew it. What I didn't say, what I kept to myself, was that 10% trust, the one no one had ever asked about. The one my father signed without understanding what it could become. Paper has a memory. It remembers promises people forget. It remembers leverage. And it waits. As we left the office, Olivia walked a few steps behind me, no longer ahead, no longer certain. They thought the will was the end of the story. It wasn't. It was just the moment I stopped pretending family loyalty was stronger than preparation. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. If you've ever been the one who stayed quiet, did the work, and still got pushed aside when family money was on the line, hit subscribe. This story isn't just about inheritance, it's about what people show you when they think you won't fight back. Like this video if it hit close to home, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. I read every response. Your story might be the next one I tell.